Hey all, good evening. That cold weather is definitely hanging on in the central and eastern U.S. We've got clear skies here. We've managed to push away most of the moisture. It's now way out in the Gulf this evening. And the charts definitely show that. You can see the main bear clinic system right there in Georgia. And we got IFR ceilings all the way from Alabama to just south of Houston. And this is the back edge of the clearing of the cloudiness from about northern Mississippi down to about San Antonio. And behind that, we've got the cold air streaming southward. But we're already starting to get a return to southerly flow in the high plains. Location of the ridge, pretty much along I-35 through Texas and then on up to about St. Louis right there. So it looks like one more night of cool weather for Texas, and then we should see things start to warm up. But if we take a look out to the west, we've got a new Pacific system moving into the area. And there's the analyzed position somewhere around the Las Vegas area. Now, one way we can try to find that is with the mesoscale chart. This is one thing that we've taken a look at yesterday. This is the NAM model. And we can kind of look at the air mass hour by hour. This is what it looked like earlier this afternoon. You can see a pretty strong warm-up around Yuma, up to near 70 degrees, and the south winds at Vegas. So normally when we see that, we kind of expect that things are in the tropical air mass. And as we continue, this is the current time here, so it kind of looks like it's still a tropical air mass, although we can see westerly flow with a slight northerly component there in the Mojave Desert. And in the San Joaquin Valley, we got winds out of the north, which is also indicating cold polar air working down the California coast. So we've got, we kind of expect that there's probably a cold front in this area. One way that we can look at this further is with the temperature anomaly charts, and I'm going to go to the GFS 850 millibar temperature anomaly, which will get us above the surface a little bit. Okay, so let's see here. There's the GFS temperature anomaly chart. And let me bring this up to midday. And if you look at Arizona here, there's it's kind of split in half here. We've got warm weather in the Four Corners area, temperatures above normal, all the way up to Salt Lake City and back towards Pioche, Nevada. And then on the other side, from Tucson, Phoenix, westward, things are below normal. So this is perhaps suggesting maybe a front sitting something like that right there. And let's see what that looks like at 0Z. There's the current chart, and whatever that is, looks like it's pushed into the eastern part of the state. So this could be a little further ahead to the east than the charts show. And then for a sanity check, we can look at the Canadian model. There's the midday chart, showing kind of a similar pattern there. And then this is peak heating about 21Z. So definitely looks like something going on in Arizona there, and kind of a spider web of isobars there with that low pressure centered around the Las Vegas area. Let me switch over and make sure that the audio is coming in good, since we've had problems over the past week or so. Let's see, the board looks good and no complaints. Very good. Okay, elsewhere, we can go ahead and use this 850 millibar temperature anomaly to find the air mass, and it looks like we've got a cold air mass working its way down the northern plains there. So there's one piece of it. It looks like another piece is up in Ontario and Hudson Bay, James Bay, right there. And this is probably heading for the northeast U.S. And then this other air mass here, when it's this far west, it does tend to kind of work down the front range, kind of like that. So we're probably going to see that happening over the next day or two. And then in behind, it looks like we've had things warm up in Alaska and the Arctic ice pack. All right, let's get back on track here with the other charts. There's our thickness and isobars, and it does show that things are getting kind of busy there in Arizona. So I think for the time being, I'm going to just drop that front right there from about Flagstaff down to Phoenix and Ajo. And there is going to be a warm front in there somewhere. And it might go something like that right there. And that corresponds with this little area of precip right around Hanksville and up to about Grand Junction, Colorado. We do know that the baroclinic system is definitely not in Nevada proper, because what we see here is cold troughing right there. In fact, the cold core is over the northwest Nevada area, so we definitely can't find a frontal low back in that region. We could find like a cold core low in that region, but we do tend to find the baroclinic low where we have these thickness lines packed together. So there's a few of them right there. And the next one down further south in Mexico, that's way off to the south. And the other one up to the north, that's part of the cold pool up north. So we can expect to find that baroclinic low somewhere in there between Vegas and probably around Safford and Tucson. So kind of where I drew that kind of works out pretty well there. So something there in Arizona, it's probably going to be heading into New Mexico or Colorado over the next day or two, and then we should see that emerge into the Great Plains. Further up to the northwest, got another system there in the Gulf of Alaska area. There's that front right there, and this is very far north. So that's going to be landing around southeast Alaska to Yukon and possibly crossing over into the lee side of the northern Canadian Rockies. And that could mean a fresh snowpack for that region and more development of cold air. So we may not be quite over with this weather pattern for at least maybe another week here. There's the Hudson Bay vortex right there. You can see it in the blue patterns here. This is indicating thickness, and the cold core is right over the Iqaluit area. Frobisher Bay used to be called that. And there's a area of thermal troughing extending westward across Victoria Island there. So this is some very cold air, and let's take a look at how cold it is. I've got a surface chart, and we can take that well up to the north. So there's Canada. It's kind of funny seeing south of flow there with temperatures right around zero. But there's the Canadian high Arctic, and we do see temperatures around minus 40, minus 41, minus 40, and minus 42. So widespread frigid air. This is definitely a very cold air mass. And looks like we get an Arctic front on the way south right there coming into the Northwest Territories. Let's take a look at the model chart and see if we can pick that out. I guess I'm going to go back to the 850 chart, and we'll take a look up north a little bit. So there's our area of cold air, centered right there around southern Baffin Island. And we can see that there's probably going to be a front, perhaps something like that. And we can kind of watch this come south. See, that's a new outbreak of polar air coming all the way down. It's going to be entering, looks like, Saskatchewan and Alberta tomorrow night. So a definite change from this very warm weather. And that's going to be probably a pretty good cold blast coming into that area. So that'll be probably the next big change for the U.S. here towards the weekend. So we'll come back to that in a little bit here. Don't want to get things out of sequence too far. Here's the upper level chart. This is the 250 millibar analysis, and this is showing classic Hudson Bay vortex way up north. North flow in the northwest, northwest quarter of the U.S., and a pretty good trough here. And this is the one that the Canadian model really picked up on a little over a week ago, and we kind of showed that. The GFS didn't pick on that so much. And yeah, it's pretty well developed there, and it's digging down into California, and it's supporting that system that we have in Arizona there. So it's definitely much more prominent aloft than it is at the surface, where we can barely even find it. It's kind of strange there, but typically when these emerge on the other side of the Rockies, they definitely do take shape big time with the surface patterns. Here's the 850 millibar chart, and it does have a little bit of definition here. So this is a little bit above the surface, and this is, keep in mind this is this morning's chart. So there's support for a front kind of like this. There's the, actually that should be hollow. And there's the cold front. So 5 degrees Celsius right there at San Diego, and then you go up the coast, drops to 2, and then you can see the northwest winds picking up. Much different from what we have there at San Diego, so the front is pretty easy to find. And let's see how things change for the 0Z chart. Should see that go a little bit eastward. And yeah, there we go. Surprising to still see southwest winds there. But I would say the front is probably just about right on top of them. And then down at the surface, we probably got the front a little bit further towards the warm air. That's pretty typical. The way these fronts stack, they stack up towards the cold air and then down towards the warm air like that. We do have the warm air advection starting up in Texas already. Even though we have a ridge at the surface at 850, we've already got south winds at 15 to 20 knots spreading over the air mass there at 850 millibars, 5,000 feet. So we probably got a little bit of isentropic lift developing in that area. I wouldn't be surprised to see stratus coming northward associated with that lift, assuming that we have the humidity for that. All right, let's take a look at the other charts. I guess we can stop off and look at the potential temperature. Yeah, you can definitely see that front right there in Georgia. Shows up very well. And we've got a little bit of that damming there in the Carolinas. And this is basically where the warm air advection side of the system is not very well developed, since there's nowhere for the cold air there in the Carolinas to go. So it sits there and isn't as well developed as the other parts of the system. And we get this southeast northwest kind of front sitting there. And a lot of times in the wintertime, that can be a very potent area for freezing rain development there in the Carolinas. Out in the warm sector, temperatures around 18 degrees Celsius, which is going to be about 64 Fahrenheit. And then on the other side around Nashville, 2. And then 5 around Jackson, so 30s and low 40s behind the front. Okay, so there's the system, and on the other side we got the ridge right there, and on the back side probably the tail end of the the Canadian polar front. And then there in Arizona, yeah, looks like we can see a little bit of what might be the Pacific air mass. It's going to be on the warm side of the gradient, so possibly around Safford down to Douglas. Don't see so much of a gradient further to the west there. It's a little bit off the screen. Okay, let's go ahead and I guess we'll pull up the satellite data. No, that's not it. Yeah. Oh, I forgot to load it. I guess I can probably load up about 5 frames here without killing the stream, so let me do that. And since we don't have a whole lot of convective cloud or anything to look at, I'm going to go ahead and pull up the IR5, which will let us look a little bit more at the air mass underneath. So basically the yellows are your very intense cold regions, like up here in the Dakotas, and then the darker greens, that's going to be temperatures around 10 to 20. So it does look like a little bit of cold air there in the high deserts of the Great Basin region. And we are picking up some clouds there in Arizona. Don't see a very well-developed comet cloud, maybe a little bit of a trace. See, I'm seeing kind of a pattern, kind of like that going on. And then above that, you can see what looks like a little bit of subtropical cirrus right there. So that would probably indicate, I don't know, I'm not sure if that's subtropical. That could be a polar front jet, but it does point to maybe something along an axis like that from about Phoenix up to Denver. And just looking very quickly at the animation, does look like a little bit of rotation there in southern Nevada, so that's probably the upper level low in that region. And then in Texas we can see a little bit of that low cloud. Is there a low cloud? I thought it was clear outside. Oh, that's what that is, yeah. This area here, this is all pretty much clear skies, but it does look like there's a little bit of stratus working its way northward, and this darker blue color indicating warm air. So there's one piece of it there, and looks like there's some more. I suspect it's something like that right there. So that would be stratus. So that's the stratus symbol for that. All right, let me take a look at the chat here, see what we got going on. Got David Moore here, and Fun with Tech, Burl H, Alexi Pinkson Walsh, Carl Burkhoff is here. David Moore mentioning that he got his house on the market there in the Metroplex. Busy weekend, relaxing with an F5. Adam Davis reporting it's cold, looking forward to a warm-up. Ryan Toomey's there in Florida, joining us, reporting another warm, muggy day in Florida. We have Sue M here, and Electric Dog and John Huntington back for the first time in a while. Okay, yeah, this is probably picking up a little bit more of the subtropical jet right there, and quite a bit of cloudiness there from Tampa north up to Atlanta. So let's take a look at maybe a few of the upper air charts. There's the 200 millibar chart. This is definitely very good for looking at the subtropical jet. And a couple of the features that we look for are shallowness. We rarely see it extending below 300 millibars. Also anticyclonic flow, and a position equatorward of the polar front jet. So undoubtedly the polar front jet is running something like this here. That's probably what we were seeing on satellite, and that right there is probably part of the polar front jet. And then the subtropical jet, it's possibly linked up like that, and that's kind of consistent with the position we saw yesterday. So that's likely what we're seeing there on the satellite. 500 millibar chart showing even there some 60 knot flow, so that's pointing towards maybe not so shallow there in the upper levels. So possibly it's got a bit of maybe polar front dynamics in it. There's the polar front there at 500 millibars. That's showing up for sure. And in between, looks like we're picking up a bit of a major shortwave ridge from about Dallas up to Wyoming there. So downstream of that, we tend to find fair weather. So things are probably not too bad there in the northeastern plains, and then out here between the ridge and the upstream trough, this is where we're expecting to see weather go downhill a little bit. Pressure falls, height falls, lift, increasing amount of humidity in the column, and chances for clouds and showers in that area right there. 700 millibar chart showing a similar picture. Looks like the ridge is a little bit more amplified there. You can see a little bit of a trough right here. Pretty good turning of the wind flow along that trough there. And it even looks like in between. Let's see, I was thinking I was seeing a bit of a trough. Yeah, right there. So that could be another feature there. And then in between, there's a ridge. So trough, ridge, trough, ridge. So that's kind of how you could go about finding these features. The small-scale troughs and ridges that are really important for severe weather, they do tend to be very small-scale, like you see right here. It can be very difficult to find them, and that's the reason we go to vorticity and height charts, because it's even a little bit better at finding those. And then finally down at 850, this shows conditions up at about 5,000 feet. So we can see a little bit of that ridging there in Texas. Keep in mind that this is a chart for this morning here. I don't think we have an updated chart. Yeah, we do. There's the 0Z chart. And let's see, the 850 ridging is pretty much confined to Arkansas, and then over Texas we're getting into the return flow already. And then out to the west, the chart is showing a little bit of that warm ridge streaming up from Mexico into the Four Corners area there. And then possibly an 850 millibar front running something like that right there. So probably this southwest wind at San Diego and Vegas, that's probably back in the cold air now that I've seen everything. Temperatures are pretty much consistent with San Francisco and Medford, definitely a lot colder than the air around El Paso and Tucson, and even Las Vegas is a little bit on the cool side there. So yeah, I would probably put that 850 front somewhere in there. Okay, time to look at the forecast, so let's do that. Yeah, I guess we can look at the vorticity. Why not? Let's get that centered there. Okay, pretty much a channeled flow indicated there. There's the polar front jet. However, embedded in that, looks like a couple of troughs, maybe one right there. That could be the one that we were picking up in the Panhandle in that region. Here's another trough. However, this is not going to show the ridges very well because we really need good variation in the light colors. See down here on the legend, there's a good spectrum for picking up the shortwave troughs, but the ridges are going to fall in this area, so we don't have too much to go off of. So typically what I will do on a chart like this is I'll pick out the troughs first, and then I'll just try to find where I have the colors, the light colors poking northward, kind of like that. That can be an indication of a ridge. However, keep in mind that there's also larger scale ridges, so even though that these are pretty small scale, there's probably a very large major ridge in here. And that's what we pick up on the upper level charts. When we analyze them manually, these tend to show up very well. It's these small scale features that are pretty hard to find. So we're going to cover that a little bit more this spring, since those are pretty important for severe weather forecasting. All right, let's look at the forecast, looking at the 500 millibar chart. Okay. Got the Canadian model loaded there. So pretty good trough there out in the West Coast area. Let's see what happens over the next few days. Looks like that trough shears out into a cutoff low in Southern California and weekends, and apparently gets carried offshore. Then it opens up towards Wednesday and Thursday, and then gets carried into the Central Plains around Thursday into Friday. Then out to the west, let's see here, progressive ridge coming in from Alaska into the Central Coast area. And we got this other trough moving in. Looks like that's actually what's picking up that trough further south. So this is basically just advecting southeastward and links up with that other trough. So we're probably going to see some stormy weather on the plains around Thursday to Friday. Then for the weekend, another trough moving into the plains. Here's another good one coming onshore. So things are getting more progressive coming in from the Pacific. And this next one digs down. Very strong winds on the backside right there coming into Oregon and California. And that should dig down into the Rockies on Monday and Tuesday. So probably another stormy pattern, and here comes another one. And this one really digs in there for Thursday and Friday, the 21st and 22nd. The question is whether this next trough picks it up, and apparently not. This one just keeps moving westward, and that emerges out into the Great Plains around Thursday to Friday, the 22nd, 23rd. And then it's like one after another. But looks like we've finally broken up the Hudson Bay vortex. So definite pattern shift. Let's see when that pattern breaks up. Looks like it hasn't completely broken up. It's still kind of hanging in there. But it does look like most of our systems starting around mid-month are coming from the west instead of from the north. Let's compare the models, and let's take a look at how things match up for the 16th at 12Z. Let me get these all synchronized. So we're comparing the GFS, the Canadian, and the European 96 hours out. Okay, so there's the GFS, indicating that trough right there over Arizona. Not much difference with the Canadian model. And European model going a little bit deeper with that trough over the San Diego area. Let's see how things look a little bit further down the line around let's say the 21st at 12Z. Okay, GFS has a pretty good trough there from Idaho down to California, and a very strong ridge in Alaska. The GFS, or the Canadian model, going for a little bit different picture. It's got two troughs, one strong one coming into Texas there. And let's see what the European model looks like. This looks to be a little bit more consistent with the Canadian model. Very strong trough coming into Texas, and another one moving through California there. So the Canadian model has actually been doing pretty well here for the past couple weeks. So let's go with that and look at the Canadian forecast for the next couple weeks. Okay, here's our system in Arizona in the Four Corners. That's going to be moving. Where does it go? Kind of looks like it gets carried northward. Let me go up to the surface chart. I'm going to look at what the GFS is showing. Let me get this aligned for you. There we go. And I'm going to take a look and see what the GFS is doing with that system, since I'm sure in the short term it's pretty close to the Canadian model. Yeah, that's kind of interesting. It looks like it starts out around Arizona, and it actually weakens and falls apart in that area. So we do get a little bit of troughing there on the lee side, but no system emerging out into the Great Plains. It does look like things change towards Thursday and Friday. Probably the dry line starting to set up there. So Thursday, it looks like that's when things are going to change here. It's probably the approach of that next trough there, moderating things. And new front coming southward right there. And GFS is putting that through the DFW area for Friday morning there. 1036 millibar high coming into Kansas. Let's see how that compares with the Canadian model. Actually, I don't have the Canadian model. Okay, we'll just look at the GFS for now. Okay, next system coming up through the northern plains there for Sunday. So this is looks like when things are going to change there for Colorado for ChaserCon. Probably just barely escaping this next system. And this definitely has Pacific influence. You can see very strong cold air mass coming into the Great Basin area for Sunday. And the system looks like it emerges on the other side there for Tuesday, and then 1038 millibar high pushes south. And then things look stormy again for the 22nd out in the Pacific. So we're seeing a little bit more of a southern storm track for Friday the 23rd. There's our next system there in the Great Plains. And since we're getting towards March, this could have some severe weather. Another system coming through the Four Corners area there. This is for the 25th. And another system in California. And the Canadian model was showing a very similar pattern. We're looking at a lot of troughs and ridges coming in from the Gulf of Alaska. Pretty much a straight shot all the way down to the southern U.S. And this is what we're seeing at the surface there, just kind of a very active weather pattern after next week. I do have one chart that I can show you. I think I've got some of this in the 850 Canadian chart. Let me see if I can bring this up. Yeah, this is the Canadian 850 millibar temperature anomaly. So it looks like the Canadian model going a little bit more aggressively with this cold push into Denver on Friday. And then for the weekend, a bit of cold weather there. So yeah, it looks like by late this week we've already got some differences between the GFS and the Canadian model. So a lot of cold air overspreading the Rockies and Great Basin area, and the cold front already down to the DFW area for Friday there. And yeah, this is probably the next system actually, now that I'm seeing it. Okay, so yeah, very strong cold push in Monday and Tuesday into Colorado. So actually the differences there are not as strong. See, I really need to make a note to load up the Canadian sea level pressure data next time. So anyway, yeah, it does look like things are going to be stormy out in the western U.S., and that's some very impressive cold air across the western U.S. for about 8 or 9 days from now. So yeah, this will definitely get into the Great Plains later next week. There it is, going through Texas on the 22nd, and then moving up to the Great Lakes area around the 22nd and 23rd. And then looks like some more cold weather for late in the month. And yeah, looks like winter is not quite over. And if this continues, I do think we're looking at a bit of a stormy spring coming up, at least early on. Okay, David Moore mentioning last spring the Hudson Bay vortex dampened the severe weather. Is it a common feature, and what causes it? There's nothing really that causes it. It's just a pattern that sets up sometimes. Sometimes we'll have a very zonal pattern set up, and we do find the vortex a little bit more north over the Canadian high Arctic. It may just be the very strong production of cold air up in Nunavut, Northwest Territories, and we're probably seeing a bit of reflection up there aloft in the long wave pattern. A little discussion in chat there about the patterns. Carl Berghoff talking about the El Nino. Carl Berghoff mentioning, after this, Weather Brains has Rick Smith as guest at the WCM. And mentioning his speeches and classes on his Twitter schedule. Okay. I did want to mention a couple of things. I forgot to show you this. Had a couple charts here showing different weather patterns. Let me see if I can get this. Hang on a second. Yeah, I figured I'd show you the charts for the super outbreak, 1974, April 3rd. There was over 100 tornadoes reported around the Mississippi River and eastward. And this is the pattern that we had the day before that. This is a National Weather Service surface analysis for April 2nd of 74. So you can see a very deep Pacific system moving into Arizona and California there. And this is what moved eastward over the next day or so, approaching the Mississippi River Valley. And let me see if I can zoom in on Texas here. All right, you can see there in the Gulf Coast, temperatures are dew points around 40. So we're starting to get the moisture, and then around Alabama, dew points running around 50 to 60. So just to the south, there's some pretty rich moisture along the coast. And then the next day, things look like this. You can see it emerged into the Great Plains. There it is, deepening rapidly there in Kansas, so it basically moved from Nevada into the Kansas area. And now we're seeing the advection of very strong moisture northward. There's a 68 dew point right there. 68. And I can see 70 there at Alabama. So this is the moisture streaming northward right there. So this is a very strong Pacific pattern. And sometimes this is referred to as a... Actually, I'm getting ahead of myself here. I was going to show you one thing about that. Yeah, you see up there in Canada, you don't see any high pressure up in that region. We do have a little bit of high pressure in the southeast U.S. there, but it's a very weak high. And this is sometimes referred to as a receding high. Now, a different weather pattern that we can have sometimes, a much different weather pattern, looks like... yeah, this actually, no, that's a little further along. Okay, so there, our high pressure is in Canada there. Very strong high pressure. Looks like we're looking at about 1044 millibars up in that region. This is sometimes referred to as a prevailing high. It tends to be very dominant and associated with strong Canadian polar air spreading across the eastern U.S. And we do have a Pacific system right there. And typically what happens is that these things don't move eastward like you saw there with the super outbreak low, but they do tend to cross over the cold dome. And we tend to get a lot of mid-level clouds and don't see a very strong reflection of the system until it reaches the other side along the southeastern Gulf Coast there. So those are two diametrically opposite patterns, and we're definitely under this one right now. And possibly when we start breaking down the Hudson Bay vortex, we're going to switch over and start seeing a little bit more of this going on here, with lower pressure up north and stronger systems coming out of the Rockies there. So that's the reason why I think if this continues and we break down that Hudson Bay vortex a little bit, we'll probably be seeing some pretty good storm systems there on the Great Plains in possibly a few weeks here. Not like the super outbreak of 74, nothing like that, but we would have some possibly severe weather to follow occasionally every few days. Okay, well that's about all I got for this evening. I appreciate you watching the webcast. Let me get our closeout music going here. Okay, take care. Hope you all have a good evening, and we'll see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.